curse, and we were able to win negotiations. Sean Bishop and the Finance Committee Health Team took on Big Pharma. Anna Kaltenbeck, these two in particular, showed that people, the seniors and consumers all over the country, can beat the biggest lobbies in the country, and none of them are bigger than Big Pharma. We made other important changes. Protection in Medicare Part D, a $2,000 annual out-of-pocket cap on medications and price gouging. Raghav Agarwal made a huge difference there. And by the way, Mr.
Now, if you guys agree that President Biden has to do something for the American people and send out stimulus checks faster, then tell me in the comments below. When the US began to shut down in the wake of the onset of the crisis, it meant that millions of families were suddenly without the income they needed. Well, now, some lawmakers suggest that this new round of relief payments should go out to a more targeted group of people. This means that some people may be left out as well. Within weeks, Congress passed a massive emergency and spending package aimed at providing relief, and that legislation were economic impact payment checks, amounting to up to $1,200 per adult. There have been a total of 3 rounds of stimulus, including additional payments of up to $600 and $1,400 per person in 2021. These are referred to as stimulus checks by many Americans. So while the government had deployed stimulus checks before, particularly in the wake of the crisis, the size and scope of the direct checks was in many ways a new experiment. A senior fellow at the Urban Bookings Tax Policy Center told CNBC that 3 of them together were massively bigger than what the government had done before. With each stimulus check, the IRS and the Treasury became faster and more efficient at sending out money. In the initial weeks of the first stimulus check program in 2020, the IRS deployed around 90 million payments. When a third stimulus check was approved by Congress on March 11th, the IRS announced on March 17th it had already dispersed about 90 million payments. Now, there were glitches along the way, with the IRS experiencing them and sending out stimulus checks. Experts say the money could have been more targeted, as some well-to-do taxpayers who were already unaffected should have not received the money. About 90% of the taxpayers received money regardless of whether they were experiencing hardship. The third round of payments phased out more quickly in an effort to limit how much people with higher incomes were receiving these checks. As the payments were deployed, there was a drop in the number of households actually spending them. While the first checks were mostly devoted to household spending, the later checks were more typically used for saving or paying down debt, a trend seen among many income levels. Leaders bargained down to $600 per person for the second round, which led to another legislative package, with $1,400 payments to top those off after Biden was elected. Those last checks happened just as the economy was about to improve, and Bernie Sanders has warned Democrats that the party is on course of a heavy defeat in November. Sanders told reporters the Republicans stand an excellent chance of gaining control of the House and Senate. The White House and Democrats in Congress have charged the Republicans have no plan to correct a series of crises facing the country and expect to raise taxes on low-income Americans. But Sanders said Thursday that line would not fly with the public. Several factors are working against Democratic plans to retain control of Congress for another 2 years. The Biden administration's domestic agenda stalled, leaving campaign promises on issues like voting rights and climate change legislation unrealized. At the same time, Biden is drowning under historically low job approval ratings, as low as 33% in a recent survey. Meanwhile, sky-high gas prices, annual inflation, and baby formula shortages have Americans stewing over just how bad things can get. Folks, President Biden can definitely use the help from Bernie Sanders and many Democrats, but I hope he can do something and send out stimulus checks.
I now yield myself 10 minutes, and thank you all for your patience. I'm the last questioner, so we'll get out of here. Ms. Boebert mentioned this is Donald Trump's birthday and wished him a happy birthday. I want to acknowledge that today is National Bourbon Day, and coming from Kentucky, I think that's an important thing to get on the record, and I will be celebrating appropriately later in the day. Mr. Williams, Mayor Williams, thanks for being here. And you are more than the mayor of Union City. You are representing the League of Cities across the country. How many of the mayors that you're familiar with think the American Rescue Plan was a bad deal?
I know no mayors that think the American Rescue Plan was a bad deal.
And that's Republicans, Democrats,
it's Republicans and Democrats. We are a nonpartisan organization. So I have no mayors that have reached out and said, I think this is a bad deal, because we worked in concert with a lot of your committee members and certainly with the Biden administration to craft this legislation to make sure that cities did get direct funding.
And one of the complaints about the CARES Act was that there was not enough flexibility offered, that the guidelines were too strict. And therefore, when we were crafting this legislation, that's what we wanted to do, was to give the cities and states and counties more flexibility in the use. And so obviously, that doesn't guarantee that everybody will use them for the best possible purpose. But the ranking member mentioned a list of things. And ones he mentioned, and I know he said there were more that he didn't mention, but didn't amount to $2 billion, which means that's less than 0.1% of the total investments made under the American Rescue Plan. So there are a lot of things that were done really well in my state, and I have a letter which I'll ask unanimous consent to enter into the record without objection. This is from the governor of the Commonwealth of Kentucky, talking about all the ways in which they have used, not all of them, but some of the prominent ways. And you mentioned some of them: water systems, broadband. We made a considerable investment in schools, both remediation of schools so they're safer, but also construction of schools. And the point I raised there is not all of the benefits of the American Rescue Plan have been realized. There are many that will be realized as time goes on because of these important investments.
You're exactly right, and it was mentioned during my conversation with Member Carter, the Greenway Trail, for example. Those things take time. Certainly this is something that we are engaged in now in developing that resource to our community. But, one of the great things that I do see have happened with this ARPA plan is that I am noticing and have noticed, not just in Georgia, in my city, but around the country, that elected officials at all levels have begun to somewhat work together in concert when it comes to the needs of people. It just concerns me that we still have a lot of this back and forth with a lot of our federal members who chose not to support it, and that's fine, that you're right. But when you think about the needs of the people of this nation, it is imperative that every person that has been sent to Washington to serve their communities, their districts, that they do the right thing when it comes to saving lives.
I totally agree. We know that funding helps states and localities, we've said, survive the pandemic and make investments that are evidence-based and community-supported. I ask unanimous consent to enter a letter from Results for America into the record, which makes that case without objection. Now I'm going to, one question. It was this Fed report, the San Francisco Fed report was referenced earlier. What didn't the Fed issue a report within the last 6 months that said they had estimated that the American Rescue Plan accounted for less than 1% of the total inflation, like 0.6 or 0.7%?
So I'd have to look, and I'm not familiar with that report, but there are numerous reports from, there's 12 regional Federal Reserves. Each has a research staff. All of them are doing research on these things. So if it's of use, I could gather the various reports and provide you with those references.
Okay, that would be appreciated. There's a recent one now that I'd like to mention and enter into the record. This is from Moody's Analytics. Mm-hmm. This is decomposing consumer price.
Works with the wealthy tax chiefs, and Adam and Eric focused on policies that would allow us to ensure they pay their fair share. Drew Crouch contributed tax policy help on prescription drugs. Rachel Kaus put in extensive work in developing the billionaire income tax. The president, by the way, has a billionaire minimum income tax. Hasn't been enacted fully yet, but I think it's well understood that everybody in America has to pay their fair share. Grace Enda assisted on the clean energy tax policies and more. Ursula Klossing supported the tax team and made sure we were ready for the floor debate. Arthur Shemitz and Melanie Jonas also supported the tax team's hard work. One other point about the Finance Committee's majority tax team. If anybody out there mistakenly believes that it is easy to offset legislation passed in the Senate, the reason they might think that way is because our incredible tax team somehow made it look effortless. The truth is, it takes a ton of hard work. Patricio Gonzalez, a member of our investigative team, has been digging into the tax practices of some of the biggest drug companies. His work went a long way to convincing key senators that our corporate laws needed reform, our corporate tax laws. Ryder Tobin, another member of the investigations team, contributed to that work and made it possible for us to survive the grueling floor debate, as did Madison Moskowitz, Claire Caliban, and Bonnie Millian. Healthcare. When it comes to drug prices, Big Pharma had a stranglehold on the United States Senate for way too long. They used that ban on negotiation and guarded it like it was the holy grail. Well, of course, everybody wants to negotiate. That's the way it works in our economic system, a free enterprise system. We were able to lift